I think there's this opportunity to create a new terminal that brings together some more modern application features, sort of like how VS Code has redefined the IDE space.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 259, Reimagining the Terminal Experience with Wave Terminal. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darin and Viktor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darin reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Viktor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darin Pope and Viktor Farsic. Viktor, we talk a lot on this show about backend, cloud, Kubernetes, but one thing I don't think we've ever talked about is desktop apps.
Desktop apps? No, we don't.
Why is that? We just don't like them?
Depends for what. I mean, everybody uses desktop apps, right? I use desktop apps. I use Terminal. I use iTerm to be more specific. I use VS Code and so on and so forth, right? Personally, I don't use much desktop apps that are not development, I guess.
It's interesting you brought up a terminal. On today's show, we have Mike Sawka on from Wave Terminal. Mike, how you doing?
Great to be here.
So Wave Terminal, I guess what it is that you have is actually in the name, a terminal. I'm going to just ask the question right off the top. Why do we need yet another terminal?
Wait. What do you mean yet another terminal? Terminal are like SQL databases from before, right? There is one or two terminals and we all use them for 20 years or so, right? So it's not really yet another.
The terminal is a forgotten space. The initial design for the terminal was over 50 years ago, back when we had hardware terminals. And so the VT100 terminal actually came out in 1978. And not much has really changed with terminals since then. I think there's this opportunity to create a new terminal that brings together some more modern application features, sort of like how VS Code has redefined the IDE space.
Is that really true? Do you really feel like VS Code has changed the IDE landscape?
It was sort of built on Eclipse and on JetBrains, right? Put a lot of the work in there. But now VS Code has, I think 60, 70% of the market share now.
But it's free. It can't be any good if it's free.
That is the power of open source. And I think that it's, backed by Microsoft, right? So
yeah, when you're backed by somebody that has, at the time we're recording this, had just surpassed Apple in market capitalization, and they're going back and forth now. Yeah, I guess I could see that. So Wave, as you're leaning towards this, is also open. Now, let me ask this question, because I haven't asked it yet. Is it Wave? Is it Wave Terminal? Is it something else?
Wave Terminal is what we're calling it. And the company is called Command Line Inc. because I've always wanted that name.
Command Line? Now, is it Command Space Line or is it Command Line? Oh, never mind. It's fine.
Command Space, yeah.
Okay, so it's Wave Terminal, and it runs, at least today, on macOS and Linux. It's open source licensed, like if you're listening to this, it's legit open source licensed, like Apache 2.0 licensed, not a fake open source license, if you will. I can sort of get going with Mac and Linux because naturally there's some terminal work there anyway. I guess you could argue Windows at some point in the future. Let's not talk about Windows because it just makes me sad. But it seems like you wrote something for Mac and you wrote something for Linux all native, correct?
No, so it's web technology. And so we're able to have a cross-platform UI.
Oh, no. Why? Okay, so if it's web technologies, please don't tell me it's Electron.
It is Electron.
Okay, look, I get it. Slack is an Electron, Discord's an Electron, everything's an Electron.
VS Code's Electron, it doesn't make it right and it doesn't make it good.
I think there was an argument maybe 5 or 10 years ago that we weren't sure what the primary application, language, and framework was going to be for modern apps that have to be cross-platform going forward. But I think now it's become the web. Both Slack, Discord, VS Code, and all the SaaS apps that we use that are on the web, those are all built on web technology. And web technology's only been getting better, right? It's backed by Microsoft, Apple, Google, a lot of performance work. You got things like WebGPU, WebGL, that are all making things able to be performant. To write a great cross-platform UI, I think web is the way to go. Now, we're a terminal. We also have some serious work to do as well. And so the back end is in Go. So we run a local Go process that actually does all the heavy lifting in terms of talking to a database, doing all the networking, and all of the shell integration. And so I think we can get the best of both worlds, where we have a highly performant Go backend that then just renders UI using web technology.
So you picked Electron and Go, but there's been other attempts at this with, was it Tauri?
Yeah, Tori, and then there's a project called Whales for Go as well. So we may end up porting there. Electron doesn't have to be the framework, but web technology, specifically HTML and React, that is core to the product. And I think one of the reasons why it's core, which is cool, is when you combine cross-platform web technology and open source all together, you get this great synergy. You can imagine, right, if we want to allow plugins, and having open source contributors contribute plugins for, say, viewing different types of files or rendering different content, creating native versions of that then have to be ported between Mac, Linux, and Windows would be a huge pain. But by being able to use React to write those, we can leverage all the great work and all the great developers out there that can write those type of applications and make them cross-platform instantly.
So what's the competition to Wave? Would it be iTerm or something like that, right? A terminal? Or would it be VS Code? What do people use these days when they use terminal?
Yeah, I think I came from iTerm. I love iTerm. But I think a lot of people just use the stock terminal. So that's Windows Terminal or PowerShell. That's the Mac OS terminal and GNOME terminal on Linux. I think there's also it's also Warp is a kind of the big up and coming, I'd say, most funded competitor.
Okay. No, I was more curious how many people, like I personally tend to use VS Code. When I say VS Code, I mean, editor, terminal, everything, right? So I wasn't sure how much people who use terminals go directly for terminal or more for ID with the terminal, right?
I think for front-end developers and for certain types of tasks, VS Code terminal is great. It works. But I do think that it makes sense that there's two applications. The terminal is really focused on execution, especially if you're going to be running sessions and collecting data and doing all those sorts of things, whereas VS Code is more focused on editing. And I think those are two really distinct use cases.
True. So how does Wave come with its own shell, or it relies on Z shell or whatever somebody's using and then builds on top of it?
So right now we build on top of Bash. We're coming out with ZSH support very shortly. But we add another layer in there. And so eventually I'd love to build my own shell. But right now we rely on Bash and ZSH. Unlike other terminals, Wave is not a direct integration with Bash or ZSH. We have another layer on top of that helps us multiplex commands, restore state, persist sessions, grab all the information to create a nice unified contextual history, and perform some of the other advanced features for Wave.
So if I had to guess, based on what you're saying there, we've got the Electron side for all of the interactions. It's making a call down to the Go layer, which is basically then shimming on top of Bash. Is that close to it?
Yeah, that's right. There's one other layer in there called Wave Shell, which is what facilitates the communication with Bash or ZSH on the local or on remote machines.
Oh, okay. So you were holding back on remote machines. So I'm used to having a terminal, and I'm used to working on the terminal either on my local machine or I'm jumping the terminal and SSH over to a different machine. Am I reading too much into it to where, okay, now I could just basically have a local quote unquote terminal on my machine, but it's actually remoted over to a different machine?
Yes. I'm trying to think if I understand the the question.
Well, okay, let me reclarify it. So typically, let's go back to iTerm. We all love iTerm, and it's 19,758,000,000 different options you can set.
Yeah.
Right? There's checkboxes galore. So typically in iTerm, I would start up an iTerm session, and I would start typing, and that would be local machine.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to connect up to a Linux machine, I would open up iTerm, SSH over to that Linux machine, and then I'd be working on that Linux machine. What I thought I heard you say potentially is with Wave Terminal, I could spin it up, type locally, local machine, just like iTerm would be. But where I think the difference would be is I could have a session defined in Wave Terminal that automatically connects over for me to the remote machine. Is that true or not true?
That's right. So you can define connections, remote connections, and Wave can automatically connect for you to those machines and then persist and keep those sessions alive with full state. And that full state can even survive reboots of your local machine, disconnections of the network, or reboots of the remote machine.
So where is that state stored?
This is one of the key innovations for Wave. So, I mean, obviously we have all the web UI and all that flashy part, but one of the key parts of how I thought about building Wave was keeping local state. And so all of the session information of, what directory you're in, what the environment is on the remote machine, we actually store locally on your local machine. And so when we reconnect, we can restore all that state directly. And this goes for history too. So one of the other key innovations is that normally history is distributed across per remote machine by user, and you can't ever search or combine that all together. And so one of the great things about Wave is we're storing all of that history locally, all in a local database. And so we can aggregate all that history from all the remote machines that you log into and then have it accessible and searchable locally.
What is that local database that you're storing everything into?
SQLite.
Of course it is.
Yeah,
Add one more application.
Easy. Actually, it's a library, so it doesn't need its own server. It integrates directly with Go, cross-platform, super stable and fast.
So searching across history, man, I cannot think of the number of times that would have come in so handy. It's like, wait, which machine was I on? What was that command I ran? Wow.
Yeah, and one of the other things is history has always been this flat file, and you can add a timestamp in there. Most people don't add it, but there's no other contextual information. So one of the other innovations that we have in Wave is adding context to all of that history. So we know what user, what machine, what directory you're in, how long the command took, the exit code, and the entire environment as well that was passed to those remote commands. And so now we can actually surface that in your history search. So one great thing is, hey, I want to find builds that took at least a certain amount of time that ended in success, right? That's a type of search that you will be able to do in Wave, which you just can't with normal history.
Is then the search also context aware? So if I go to do something on machine A and then do something else on machine B, go back to A, do I get, I'm guessing, autocomplete or something like that is aware of that I'm again on that machine and what I was doing there, not everything I ever did?
Yeah. So one of the ways, like, what's the right UI for that? I think it's a great question. So up arrow obviously just looks at all of the same commands that you've run in that session. But we have other ways to switch that. When you do, say, a control R to look at your previous commands, you can also look at commands that were run on that same machine, remote machine, or the same workspace that you're in, or across everything you've ever run. We also have advanced history search for more exact use cases.
So what made you want to build a terminal? How did we end up here? It's like, of all the things, why would you want to build a terminal?
Yeah, so I'd actually started working on a different startup. It was called Dashboard, and we were dealing with internal tools. As part of that, started doing a lot of customer discovery, talking to a lot of back-end developers. And in the course of that, I actually realized that terminal was just a much bigger and better problem. It touched every single, every developer uses the terminal. And one of the first insights that I got was we all have that text file of commands that we keep. I had one, copy and paste commands out of that text file, out of a Google Doc or out of whatever note-taking system that you have. And that seemed crazy to me. In 2023, now 2024, having copying and pasting commands out of a text file into the terminal sounded like craziness. And then the more I looked into this, that history problem became huge as well. It's like, why is there no way for me to search all of the history that I've had across every command that I've typed into my terminal? I should be able to search through. And that didn't exist. So I think when I code, and I started to just code up some prototypes, like what would be possible? And I was able to see how history aggregation and contextual history could work. And I also could see how persisting sessions and persisting local state could work as well. And once those things came together and I knew that they were possible to do, everything else fell into place and we were off to the races.
So you were working on another startup. This came out as being the real thing. Of course, it sounds like probably you've gotten, $100 million in venture funding, and that was day one, right? You were just able to get that right off the bat because, hey, let's go ahead and throw $100 million at a terminal. Is that your story?
If only. If someone had told me how hard it would have been to make this startup into a reality, I don't know if I'd be here today. So maybe that's a blessing in disguise. But really, it was a lot of hard work. I mean, I put in 6 months on the previous startup. I put in a year of work on Wave. I got into Alchemist Accelerator, did demo day, and then that's finally after that is when we got our first seed funding.
Let's go back to the terminal for a second. I'm sitting there. I've got my history on my terminal, but I live on 3 different machines. Is there any way I could see the history from one? Like, can my profile follow me on my machines?
Not today, but that is a feature that we are definitely going to be working on. One of the ways of having all this local state plus this Go backend is being able to allow for cloud syncing and being able to keep different computers in sync, and then also the collaboration amongst the team. And so this is one of the things where having access to all of my history is amazing, but being then able to get access to my team's history or to an enterprise of developers' history just makes it that much more powerful. Everything that we've built with Wave for this single user product, it's with a mind for how that's going to work in a more multi-user environment.
When you say cloud, would it be like Wave cloud, or would it be storage that I define? Because without naming names, one of the concerns of some other terminals I've seen was, this is great, I'm not sending you my data type of response, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I get that. And we're open source, so we'll probably have both options. I mean, my guess here is that we'll introduce our cloud services first, but we'll probably have ways, especially once you come to an enterprise level feature where enterprises want to be in control of their data and have that stored in a way that they want, in a place that they want. That'll be a feature that we'll support. Maybe not at first, though.
So what would be the rough mechanics of that? You said everything's stored locally on the machine. So what I'm hearing is I have single user, really at today, single machine. So if I've got 3 machines, I'll have 3 different histories and life goes on. Right? It's just what it is today.
Yeah.
What are the mechanics of that? I mean, are we storing it in, you already said it was SQLite, which is fine, but is everything inside of SQLite? Is there other stuff that's happening?
Yeah, so some of the outputs are stored as files on disk. It's more efficient that way. But the way that we're planning on doing this is all opt-in. I mean, we don't, no one wants their history just flying up somewhere that they don't know, or, even sharing with your team, right? You might not want to be sharing everything. So the idea that we have is around shared workspaces. And those workspaces, if you create tabs and sessions inside of those, those would be fair game to be shipped up to some sort of cloud service and then synced either back locally for yourself or for your team. And that's how we're thinking about collaboration as well.
So the rough analogy to me on that is name off any of the Apple services.
Yeah,
like reminders or list. I can have my list and only I can see it, but I could share a list with my wife to where we could both collaborate on it.
Yeah, I think especially for us, so one of our core values is trying to be open and transparent, and we want to make sure that people are in control of where their data goes and, what data they want to share and what data they don't, because there is private stuff going on in the terminal. But I do think that the benefits of being able to share it and sync it can outweigh the risks.
I could think about, let's export my AWS key. That's probably not something I would want to sync.
Yeah, that's right. And the security around this is going to be interesting. I think that there is, for a single user mode, end-to-end encryption makes a lot of sense, but then you would be giving up potential AI features that could be useful. So I think we'll try to see where the balance of that comes down, and then also what features people want.
Is there this is a combination of a question or a feature request, take it as you wish. Is there a way to somehow put things into boxes? Like, hey, I'm working on this, and Darin would benefit from that when he works on the same thing, right? Not necessarily from the whole history, because he would get lost, right? I did 10,000 commands, but there are those 100 commands that I used when I was working on X, whatever X is, right?
Yeah, no, this is really interesting. Figuring out how to share playbooks in an open way is one of the things that we're working on as well. I also think even just being able to take a session and being able to save it and send it to somebody is huge. And this is one of those big oversights with existing terminals, which I cannot believe has not been solved. There is no way to save a terminal session and then restore it as if it continues. We have things like script or being able to replay a script file. But that's like if you had an Excel document and then someone sent you a video, right? There's no way to hit up arrow. There's no way to see what commands were run. There's no way to see what the output of directories you were in was. And so I think for training, onboarding, playbooks, incident response, I think these are huge things that can enhance developer experience. I also actually for tutorials and online web stuff as well. I mean, how many times have we seen YouTube videos of here's the top 10 terminal commands you should know? And then you have to copy and paste them out of the info box on YouTube. It's ridiculous, right? You want to be able to get that session, import it directly into your terminal, and maybe even play along with it. That'd be cool.
That would solve one of my problems, which are probably not common, but I do a lot of YouTube videos, and I always provide the gist so that people do not pause the video and stuff like that if they want to reproduce, right? Being able to somehow wrap what I did and convert it into something reproducible would be absolutely awesome.
And I think one of the things for us is, obviously that's going to work with Wave, but we do want to create an open format. And I'm pretty sure that open format is going to be Markdown. And so it's something that can look good and exist in Git and be viewed just as a web page, but also easily importable into something like Wave Terminal, where then you would get the full session, up arrow, and history integration and all of that goodness.
Well, more importantly, with Markdown, in case something was wrong, you could edit it.
Yes. Yeah. How many times do I think it's maybe the use case you were just talking about of, they're not maybe commands I've run, but they're also commands I know I just want to keep around and like document a little bit. This is what this command does. This is what I need to pass to it, and have it documented, but also easily available in the terminal.
The one you were talking about with incident response, I was taking it a step beyond that. I mean, it's not so much an incident response. It's fine when everybody's working together. But if it's like a severe P1, you're probably not going to be done within that single shift. And you're going to have to do a handoff. So being able to see everything that happened without going back through Jira or whatever your incident response tool was at the time, maybe a Google Doc, at least I can see in the history, this is the session that we are using to remediate this issue. Everybody's here.
Yeah, and so much better than copying and pasting that into, say, a Jira ticket. I mean, we've all seen those huge text dumps of a session history, and they're terrible.
Do you store somewhere the outputs, STD outs and STD errors as well, or only the commands
so we
themselves?
have the full output from the commands as well. And so that's one of the cool things about Wave Terminal is that normally when you open the terminal, it's blank, right? You start a new job, nothing's there. Can you imagine if Slack or Discord worked like that? When you started up, it was blank. So one of the things is because we're persisting all of your tabs and all of your sessions, when you open Wave up, you see everything that was there the last time you closed it, including the outputs.
Let's assume that what you stated, that all developers are using terminals. I'm twisting your words a bit, but let's assume that that's true. If people are not using terminal today, why should they use a terminal? I mean, what are they missing by not being able to point and click all the time?
Oh, the terminal is such a great application. I mean, that's one of the things where, I love the terminal and I want to make it better. And I also think that a lot of applications, because of the interface of the terminal, which is off-putting, especially to less technical folks or to new developers, a lot of that functionality has moved to the web, right? There's so many tools and developer tools which are very siloed and can accomplish a specific task, like say database viewers or Postman or all these different types of interfaces which used to live in the terminal are now moving to the web or to their standalone applications. And I think bringing the terminal back where things are scriptable, composable, and work locally, I think is it's really exciting.
How big is the team right now that's working on this?
I have 3 full-time engineers, a contract engineer, and myself. So six people right now. Sorry, what did I say?
Five
people. Five. Sorry, let me try.
You can create a front end with Electron and a Go back end, but 1 + 3 + 1 is 6.
Yeah,
okay.
that is basic math. Sometimes escapes me.
Or maybe it's just
That's what
West
he's
Coast
thinking.
math because you're based, I'm assuming, in the Bay Area or somewhere in that general vicinity, correct?
Yeah, we're San Francisco based. We are hiring, so that's maybe I'm thinking the full team will be 6. But yeah, I'm based in San Francisco. We also have engineers in Seattle and San Diego.
So with that in mind, if somebody was wanting to apply, so let's say you've got somebody that who are you looking for? Like, okay, you're trying to get to 6, not 5, but 6. And you're ready to go to 7 or 8 or 9. What is it that you're going to be looking for? How should people prepare for this? Meaning they're used to working either fully back end or they're used to working really front end, but all that's still pretty much web. And they've never done desktop before. I mean, how do they need to think differently, even though it all sounds like it's just web on my desktop?
I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of having web on the desktop. It's that those skills for web development translate really well. In fact, actually, web on desktop is easier because you have less latency and you don't have to build for all the different browser flavors and mobile as well. I do think that the terminal is an interesting space. Developer tools are interesting as well. It's great to be able to be a developer and build tools that you use yourself and then other developers and friends can use as well. But it does take a mix of knowing backend stuff and also caring about UI and how interaction and UX works as well.
What's interesting to me is that I have a feeling as if we see a comeback of terminal lately, right? Because I'm looking at what you guys are doing. I'm looking at what Charm is doing. I'm not sure whether you're familiar. Yeah. And also the CLIs or few terminal applications I'm using as if it was somehow forgotten and now people are not forgotten. I mean, it was never forgotten, right? People have never stopped using terminals, but as if they stop thinking that it can be anything but what it is in a way, right? And I'm not talking about terminal now only, right? But also experience in terminals because of the terminal itself or applications running as terminal applications or whatsoever.
It's funny, actually. If you think of AI, It's very much like a terminal. What was the original way that we could type things to a machine and get responses? It's just much more structured right on the terminal than something like ChatGPT. But I do think that there's the simplicity of the terminal, the composability, the scriptability. Those are all things that terminal is great at. And I don't want to lose that. I do think that we can make the interface better. So I think there's a lot. I mean, Charm is great. All these TUI frameworks are great, but sometimes you want a button that's actually a button, and sometimes you want a border that's actually a border, right? I mean, I think there is limitation to text UI, and we can do better by exposing some of those web UI concepts into the terminal in an opt-in way.
I guess there is that part of you building the terminal itself and all the features and functionality that we talked about or didn't. Is there a third-party component there as well? So would I expect, and this probably wouldn't be tied only directly exclusively to Wave, but would I expect to see terminal applications being done differently in a way? Some kind of maybe new standard or something, right? Just as HTML was evolving over time, right?
Yeah. So right now we're focused on plugins. So we can do things like viewing JSON, editing files natively inside of the terminal, viewing CSV files, viewing images. Those are great applications. And we're working a file system viewer as well. So you can actually see a graphical UI that you can interact with directly inside of the terminal. But again, those are all opt-in, right? If you like using LS or you like using VI on the terminal, that's great, right? And so we're not taking that away. We're just adding other options. And we want these applications to be able to be written by third parties in the future.
Are you modifying or hijacking in a way the existing commands? In terms like, for example, if I type open something, right? That right now opens wherever, right? In a browser, would that open within a context of Wave result in a different outcome in a way? If you understand what I mean, or whichever other command, ls, right? Or
so right now we're writing alternate commands. So we're not hijacking the commands per se, except in the idea of renderers. And so we do have this concept of if you had a command that output JSON, you can then view it in the regular terminal interface, or you could say view that in a JSON renderer directly. Same thing for things like images or other types of data. We'd like to support that. There's other applications that don't work as well that way, where you need input and output, and then those would be custom written plugins for Wave.
So if I type cut, I see still the same terminal output. But then if I want it Wavified, then that would be a different command, right?
Yeah, and that's either setting a renderer for the output or running a different command depending on what that actual application is. We're trying to make sure everything is keyboard accessible, and you can also script things and do things directly on the command line because we're command line people.
Where is AI? I can't believe I said that. Where is AI going to really end up in this space?
AI is redefining everything. And I know, bringing AI to the terminal, it's one of those things that I'm sure there's a group of people who are like, no, keep it away from this. But there's so many useful applications here, especially to help people write commands, to check commands, to put guardrails around things so you don't shoot yourself in the foot, and then synthesizing and searching through vast amounts of data. What's been missing for the command line, and why I think we've seen, hundreds of startups working on code generation, is there is no repository of contextual commands and output that exists. No one has it. There's not like the GitHub for terminal commands. And so one of the first steps to creating meaningful AI in the terminal is to be collecting that information, which is what we're doing. Now, of course, we'll have And we already do have integration with ChatGPT directly. It can help you write commands. It can answer questions for you in the terminal. But I think to get to that next level, to be truly useful, to be able to synthesize playbooks, to be able to execute playbooks, to be able to provide more specific guidance to your own environment, that's going to require the type of data collection that we're doing.
But what if I don't want it? I don't want it.
I'm a big fan of opt-out, right? I mean, if you don't want to integrate with AI, that's fine, right? I mean, no one is forcing you. And I think that's one of the big things that can get misunderstood about Wave is, I said, hey, you can edit remote files using the Monaco VS Code editor directly inside of Wave Terminal. People are like, well, no, I love VI. And I'm like, well, I love Emacs. And if you want to do that, we still support it. It's just adding options. And so I think the same way that, we have all your history. If you want to be able to send that to AI to help you write commands, you can. If you don't, you don't have to.
You've said opt-in and opt-out a couple different ways. How are you long-term envisioning it? Is everything opt-in? Like, okay, here's the minimum things you have to do. Like you have to do this part. But this other list of 40 things, it's like, okay, now you opt in for these things.
I think to me, it's if something's leaving your computer, right, to a place that you don't control, like ChatGPT or OpenAI or wherever that is, you need to have some say in that. And that's kind of the principle that we're trying to operate under.
How would you visualize that? Let's forget about the opt-in. It's like, okay, I'm in, I've installed, everything's good. Is there like I don't know, I'm thinking like old IRC, just a slash command or something. That's like, okay, what is my current state? What am I doing? What data is going out? How can I see the data that's going out?
That's a good question. With the UI, I usually think of active commands. Like if I'm trying to compose a command, right, I might be asking ChatGPT or something like that for help. In those cases, it's very explicit what's going on. It's like, hey, I'm asking for help. We're transmitting this data, and you know what's going on. I think things that are in the background, those are harder, right? Those are probably explicit opt-ins. Like if you install this plugin, you're giving it permission to, send data to this service. This is the types of data that you can send, and you just have to be aware of it.
Well, I want to be able to see what that data is that's being sent. Right. Let's say I've opted in. Well, let's forget about the plugins for a moment. Like we were talking about being able to opt in for integration with OpenAI.
Yeah.
Right. So, and by default, and this is sort of a contrived example, you're not giving me an OpenAI key. I'm going to provide my own. So if I don't provide it, I know it's not going to get there. But how do I know what's being sent to Wave Terminal as the project? Because I'm assuming there's some telemetry in there. Is like, hey, this person used this on this day, and that was pretty much. I don't know what the data is. Like, I don't mean like just like that general data going out. How can I know what data is actually just going out?
Yeah. So for telemetry, we definitely have the off switch, and so we're not even collecting that much telemetry. It's just basic counters and things like that, so we know how many people are actively using the terminal. But there's definitely an opt-out. If you opt out, we're not going to send any telemetry to us, and we put that right up front when you install it. In terms of the other data, I'm trying to think of who does that well. Like, I mean, I'm wondering who.
Nobody does it well. That's my point. Nobody does it well. So can you be the first to please do it well?
That's a good idea. I mean, we definitely are open source, so I think that helps. So it is possible to see what's going on, and then it can be verified that we aren't sending telemetry or what data we are querying to send to an AI service. It's all open source. So that's one level, but I think you're right. It would be nice to have some sort of maybe debug view, almost like, in the web inspector, you can see. Yeah, you can see.
It's almost like a built-in Wireshark, so I can actually see what's leaving and going somewhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have this concept of slash commands, and so that's how everything is run inside of the application now. And so, having some sort of debugging on that could be really interesting. That's also the way that you can then build scripts, right? If you know everything that happened, you can replay it and turn it into a script. It's kind of cool.
So Wave Terminal can be found at waveterm.dev. There will be a link off to GitHub. And in fact, if you're on Mac OS and you're using Brew, it's about as simple as brew install. You just have to add the cask wave. That's it. Brew install -- cask wave. Linux, you should go ahead and create the brew recipe for Linux too, just because. Hey, you're using Go, so you should be able to use Go Releaser, which does all this stuff magically for you.
No, actually, I'll have to check that out.
Well, I don't know. It'll take care of the front end. Actually, it probably will because you're just shipping a binary, right? That's all it is.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Go Releaser will help you out a lot on that. Yeah, because I know Go Releaser will create the brew installs for you. So if you did that by hand, you did too much work.
Yeah, the Linux packaging, we definitely are looking for help with Linux packaging. So
I think Go Releaser may be your friend. I think since you're already using Go, why not? Mike, anything else?
It's been great to be here. I'm excited to be on the podcast, and I'm hoping that people will just go to the website, try it out, download it, and give us feedback. Where I look at all the GitHub issues, I look at all the Discord messages, and just really excited to see any feedback that people have.
Thanks for coming on, Mike.
Great. Thank you.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.